Hello, world and universe. Welcome to the Trevor Donald Experience. Manifest your truth. And if you're new to the channel, please hit that like and subscribe button. And for all my continued followers, I want to say thank you. And this is an opinion-based video channel where I try to open your eyes and ears up to some of the travails and tribulations that take place throughout our cities, our states, our country, and sometimes around the world. And I got one for you straight out of St. Louis. But before I get started with it, I want you to know that here in St. Louis, Missouri, in the Midwest, we have had a heat wave for the last 3 to 4 weeks. We went on a 14-day run of a 98-degree temperature and a 108 heat index. And there hasn't been much rain. It's been very humid. And today we got some severe rain coming down to cool off. And I do have the door open where I'm in my office, and that you may hear some rain or some background noise to cool off a little bit. So we needed much needed rain, and it's here today. Well, let's get into what has happened here in St. Louis recently with the St. Louis County Executive. And before I get into it, I want to tell you that this story is encapsulated around politics, Democrat versus Republican. St. Louis City, for those that don't know, is a blue city. However, the state of Missouri is a red state. So we're talking Democrats versus Republican. And in today's time, under the tutelage of President Donald Trump, race identity politics is a big issue. DEI is a huge issue. There's never been a scenario with a president that has created this much positive and or negative emotion about him and his administration. This is the first time, and he's put out many executive orders. But I will say to you, I think this is a rare moment where the average citizen, based on all of these executive orders, Donald Trump wanting to reduce government waste, he wants to remove DEI. This is a time where the average listener or tax-paying citizen may start looking at legislation, the laws, and seeing what is actually going on. I tell you all the time, you need to know your city and state politics more than your federal. In my opinion, the things that are being legislated and voted on in your city and your state, I think has a much faster, immediate effect on you as a tax-paying free citizen than your federal laws. We all know that the media hype is continuous based on who is in the White House. However, many people don't even know who their state legislators are. Who is your state senator, your congresswoman, your congressman? Who is on your state Supreme Court? Well, this story has everything to do with city politics, city and state politics. As I said, St. Louis City is a blue city, Democrat. However, the state of Missouri and St. Louis County are Republican, is red. So the dividing line in St. Louis for St. Louis City going east to west would be right at Skinker, where Washington University starts. So the city is blue, starting at Skinker and moving into Clayton, Chesterfield, Ladue, Baldwin. That is primarily a red demographic. And then you go beyond Highway 270 that runs north and south, and you have St. Charles County, which is definitely a red area as you proceed further into the state of Missouri. So we got politics, identity politics playing here. We also know when I talk about racial politics that the majority of middle class and upper middle class blacks vote Democrat. They've been doing that since the 60s. However, prior to the 60s, during the Jim Crow era, and during segregation, 87% of black families voted Republican. And then the pendulum swung as the civil rights movement and many of the bills that were put on the books under Lyndon Johnson, black people reversed and started voting Democrat. And now many black people vote Democrat just blindly. And on the other side, you have many middle class and upper middle class white folks who vote Republican. So you got racial dynamics here, and you have identity politics playing out. Well, this story has everything to do with politics, blue versus red, and what is exactly going on, and how our governmental officials are using our taxpayer dollars, whether it's legally or illegally. And Dr. Sam Page, the St. Louis County Executive, and he is basically, for those that don't know, the St. Louis County Executive, as I said, the county starts at Skinker and moves west into Clayton, which is where downtown Clayton is where the St. Louis County Exec, St. Louis County Prosecutor, their offices are at. The St. Louis County Executive is basically the mayor of St. Louis County. So the mayor of St. Louis City, which is blue, is newly elected Kara Spencer, and the St. Louis County Executive, who is basically the mayor of St. Louis County, and it's a red area, is Dr. Sam Page, who ironically is a Democrat. So what has happened to Dr. Sam Page? Did he get his hand caught in the cookie jar? Felony charges against Dr. Sam Page draw surprise and some legal skepticism. The criminal case is a rare example of government officials being prosecuted for a common, if not questionable, practices by St. Louis area governments. So when I'm getting ready to story, I'm going to tell you it's even questionable whether this is legal or illegal. But they indicted him. So Attorney General Andrew Bailey, who's Republican, announced that St. Louis County Executive Dr. Sam Page had been indicted on 4 counts, including 2 felonies. So 2 felonies and 2 misdemeanors over charges that he used county funds to send a postcard to voters. Yes, he got indicted over postcards and how he spent the money to ascertain these postcards to send out to voters. It's all about Proposition B. So it doesn't sound like this is a major issue, but he's in semi-major trouble. And this is where you see where our politicians are doing things in the dark that we never know or have any idea about. And it makes you wonder when President Donald Trump says that there's voter fraud going on, that there's fake news, that there's a lot of illegality that is taking place in our city, state, and definitely our federal government. It makes you question maybe President Trump is not as crazy as we think. So the postcard provided information about Prop B, the ill-fated initiative that would have allowed the county council to fire department heads. So in my understanding, I think Sam Page, St. Louis County Exec, was against this proposition because that took the power out of his hands to make that executive decision to terminate someone, and it was going to put the power into the city council. And I think that's where Sam Page had a problem. Dr. Sam Page has defended the use of county assets as a permissible public education campaign. So he wasn't saying he was sending these postcards out to change someone's mind or the way they voted. He is allegedly saying that he was trying to raise the level of public education on this particular bill called Prop B. He just wanted to properly educate you. He wasn't trying to sway your vote. That's what he's saying. However, Attorney General Bailey says that it is instead the theft of the taxpayer. Because with these postcards, Dr. Sam Page did not use his own personal money. He used the coffers from the taxpayers. So, Attorney General Bailey's prosecution stems from a complaint filed by University City-based watchdog Tom Sullivan. Now, here again, I tell you about paying attention to the power of the pen and how your city and state politicians are legislating and passing bills that you need to know are either for you or against you. And you have this gentleman, Tom Sullivan, who's paying particularly attention to what is going on with St. Louis County and how they are pushing bills and passing laws at the right appropriation on how those funds are being spent when it comes to mailers and postcards. So it says Tom Sullivan, who unearthed, and here's the allegation, that county expenses of $4,999.95 went for printing the mailer and another $30,771.44 went for postage. So we're talking about $36,000 worth of taxpayer money. The grand jury returned indictments on 2 counts of stealing by deceit and 2 counts of election law violations. This is where you got to pay attention to the law. You might think that number of 35,000 is a small number, but when it comes to swaying votes at the tutelage of a government official using taxpayer dollars, that is against the law. Doesn't that sound very similar to some of the things that President Trump has talked about? And that doesn't mean I'm pro or against Trump. Watchdogs Tom Sullivan estimates he's filed at least 20 similar complaints against various election-related expenditures by government entities, including many in St. Louis County. He said very few, he acknowledges, have been taken seriously. So this guy has been on top of, he's got his finger on the pulse of what is going on in St. Louis County, and he has filed numerous complaints and nothing has ever turned out until now. He said it's a whole big issue that's generally being ignored. He says, I've often felt that St. Louis County is probably the state capital for what we've had for so many years with this particular part of the law. Here, listen, of the law. Historically, Sullivan says, he's complained to the Secretary of State, who has then referred the cases to the local prosecuting attorney. So he files these complaints that go to Capitol Hill in the state capitol in Missouri, and then they reverse it and send it back to the St. Louis prosecuting attorney, who actually works with and under the St. Louis executive, Dr. Sam Page, which creates a conflict of interest. So you file a complaint with the Secretary of State. That's at the Capitol. That complaint, if it has any meat or mustard to it, goes back to the St. Louis County prosecutor, who works with Dr. Sam Page, who they are making these allegations against. So he says that in this case, St. Louis County prosecuting attorney, who is Melissa Price Smith, had to recuse herself, as I just said, because she is working hand in hand with Dr. Sam Page. She sent the matter to the county's presiding judge, who appointed Attorney General Bailey as special prosecutor, with perhaps predictable results. Now, follow it. The Republican AG, Andrew Bailey is Republican, the state of Missouri is Republican, the city of St. Louis and some of its surrounding areas are Democrat. So is this a play on politics, or did St. Louis County Executive Sam Page really do something wrong and hubris? The Republican AG has a demonstrated interest in high-profile meat for his base. And Page, who is a Democrat, is the is the bete noire of many conservatives in St. Louis County. Typically, Sullivan says prosecutors have simply failed to take any official action on these complaints. He ticks off a long list that went uninvestigated by everyone from former prosecutor Bob McCullough. So Sullivan has been filing these complaints for years. So the previous St. Louis County prosecutor Bob McCullough, and all the way to St. Louis Circuit Attorney Jennifer Joyce. So this guy has filed these complaints on egregious behavior in his opinion, and teetering on illegalities with politicians. And he has done that from St. Louis County with previous St. Louis County prosecutor Bob McCullough, all the way to the previous St. Louis Circuit Attorney Jennifer Joyce. He said, "I can assure you, if Wesley Bell had still been the prosecutor and it was sent to him by the Secretary of State's office, he's saying that Attorney Wesley Bell would have sat on it and done nothing," Sullivan says. But here was a rare exception, was St. Louis Circuit Attorney D. Joyce Hayes. When she was a St. Louis Circuit Attorney, she had a situation with the fire chief under this similar situation. Here this one goes. He says, St. Louis Circuit Attorney D. Joyce Hayes, who forced then St. Louis Fire Chief to pay back funds he used to send a mailer about a bond issue. You wouldn't think that the chief of police would be involved in politics like that, and evidently he manages the fire department's budget, and he was using the taxpayers' money to send out mailers on a bond issue that had to deal with the fire department. And as a result of that, when St. Louis Circuit Attorney D. Joyce Hayes got wind of it, she stopped it. In another instance, Sullivan filed a civil complaint against the University City Library District for a similar expenditure, only to see the lawsuit dismissed for lack of standing. Here again, we're talking about our city and county libraries. You have to remember, the city and county library people that work there are technically city and county employees. He acknowledges that he was surprised to see the matter lead to felony charges against Dr. Sam Page. Does he support those charges? In other parts of the country, they send people to prison for this sort of thing, he says. Here, they just say it's just a regular deal. Well, we got a couple of attorneys who chimed in on this and had some opinion, some criminal defense attorneys. Criminal defense attorney Terry Niehoff says he's handled hundreds, if not thousands, of stealing cases in his 30 years of practice. He isn't convinced that the conduct Sam Page is accused of meets the criteria for felony stealing. He says that Page had the authority to okay the expenditures, so it's not clear how it would be considered unauthorized. He got the okay to authorize the expenditure because Sam Page is the only one that has direct authority to check those expenditures off. He also says he's unsure how the Attorney General will prove that Page knowingly committed a crime. They're saying he took this by authorizing the spending of the money to send out the flyers, knowing that he's not authorized to do it, when in fact he was authorized to do it because he's the St. Louis County executive. He gives the ultimate authorization on how funds are being allocated. Adds Attorney Niehoff, I don't know how in the world it can be called stealing. I'm sure it has nothing to do with politics at all. Now he's being facetious there because, as you remember, Attorney General Andrew Bailey is a Republican, and St. Louis County executive, who's basically the mayor of the St. Louis County, Dr. Sam Page, is Democrat. So he's being a little facetious in making that statement that politics doesn't have a play in it. Defense attorney Scott Rosenblum defended previous county executive Steve Stenger on public felony corruption charges. The previous St. Louis County executive ended up going to prison for corruption. For what Stenger was ultimately sentenced to almost 4 years in prison. So there has been some corruption and things going on in our St. Louis County administration. This is not something that's brand new. Rosenblum says that the charges against Page are of a much different, lower order than what Stenger faced. He compares them to a secretary. He said the things that they're alleging for Sam Page is he compares it to a secretary at a law firm sending wedding invitations out using the office's postage. Will we turn her into the police? He said probably not. Rosenblum isn't as skeptical as Attorney Niehoff about Page's actions meeting the criteria for felony stealing. He describes Page's alleged conduct as falling into a gray area and predicts an intense fight ahead. It's a whole new landscape out there, he notes. If you take the President Trump's approach, you take a pretty aggressive approach here. As I said, this all is kind of encapsulated on the kind of emotions, this tornado of emotions that this President Donald Trump has galvanized across our entire country. You got blue versus red. You have white versus black. You have white male versus white female. And there has never been a time in history where you've had a president that creates this mayhem of emotions like President Donald Trump has done. And with all these executive orders, I think the caveat and the good thing here is raising your emotions, but it also should raise your level of intelligence and learning to go actually see, can President Trump get these executive orders passed? How is Congress relating to it? Whether it's the Medicaid cuts that Congress backed. They're talking about almost 12 million people will be affected by losing their Medicaid, their health insurance. It should turn a bell on, heighten your senses, that you should start looking at how your city, state, and federal politicians are legislating on your behalf with the power of the pen. Scott Rosenblum said, in these situations, I don't see anybody pleading guilty. It wouldn't be the best thing for their political career and probably be the end of their reign. You also have to know that Dr. Sam Page, you hear me say doctor, is actually an anesthesiologist. So why he would even want to enter politics after going to medical school and doing a residency in anesthesiology, why he would even want to be bothered with this. You have to remember, a year or two ago in doing Dr. Sam Page's tenure, there were some issues about him still being a full-time anesthesiologist and also being paid as the full-time St. Louis County executive. There were issues and rumblings that they wanted him to leave either job, either be a full-time anesthesiologist or the full-time St. Louis County exec. I personally think it would be hard to do both. He must be just an outstanding genius of a man, Sam Page. Sam Page is scheduled to be in court for arraignment on August 29th of this year. But it also goes back in 1976. Here's where you have to read the legislation. The California Supreme Court explored a case alleging the director of the California Department of Parks and Recreation had wrongfully misspent $5,000 to promote a bond issue. So there are a lot of folks that are doing these city and state politicians that are doing these kinds of things that you know nothing about. So a civil lawsuit had sought to force the director to personally repay the funds. So they did not indict him on this set 1976 statute here or lawsuit that took place, and they made him just pay the money back. So that's where, should Sam Page be charged as for two counts of 2 misdemeanor accounts and 2 felony accounts, or should they just make him repay the money now that he got his hand caught in the cookie jar? The court gave the suit the go-ahead finding. A state park department's use of public funds to finance an election campaign in favor of a park bond issue may at first blush seem like a quiet, innocuous, and perhaps even salutatory practice. But in the United States Supreme Court, it cautioned nearly a century ago for it to be unconstitutional practices often get their first footing in their mildest and least repulsive forms. So what he's saying there is that these politicians might steal a little bit of money, not get caught, but a small thing will turn into a big thing. And he's saying in our policy or our political climate, the constitutional commitment to free elections guarantees an electoral process free of partisan intervention by the current holders of governmental authority or the current trustees of the public treasury. This is where you have to read. So you have to pay attention and dive into what's going on with these statutes and legislations. They're saying that these politicians cannot use taxpayer money. The decision noted an important caveat. Although the department did possess statutory authority to disseminate information to the public relating to the bond election, the department, in fulfilling this informational role, was obligated to provide a fair representation of the relevant facts. Sullivan, for one, has sought to illustrate the way the county's mailer on Prop B didn't do that, and Attorney General Bailey clearly believes the mailer crossed the line. So they want to make sure that the politician is in office that has used taxpayers' money without any oversight is not creating a bias on a particular proposition or bond issue to be waived into that politician's favor. And they're not using their own money. He said, I conducted this investigation into Sam Page's alleged misuse of public funds because the people of St. Louis County deserve accountability, not corruption, Bailey said in a statement. Public officials must follow the law, and my office will work to ensure that they always do. So I know that took a little bit of time, but I think this is a worthy informational video about what is taking place with the St. Louis County Exec, Sam Page, who also happens to be an anesthesiologist, a doctor, physician, who is still working full-time as that, along with working full-time as a St. Louis County executive, which is basically the mayor of St. Louis County. And now, allegedly, he has gotten his hand caught in the cookie jar by using taxpayer funds to sway folks on a particular proposition called Proposition B. What do you think? Do you think now that these allegations have come about, should they, that the legal system or the Attorney General, Andrew Bailey, is he having too much gumption to try to prosecute Dr. Sam Page? Or should Dr. Sam Page get a slap on the wrist and maybe personally pay the money back and pay a fine and be ensured that he will not do this again as a St. Louis County exec? Tell me what you think. There's a lot of dirty politics that are happening in the dark that need to come to light, and it makes you wonder when our president and previous presidents have said that there is voter fraud, voter corruption. Is that possibly correct? Well, Sam Page has to answer those questions when he is arraigned on August the 29th, and we will have to see what happens. The previous St. Louis County executive, Steve Stenger, did get charged with corruption and was found guilty and served 4 years in prison. So this is nothing to play with. This is probably the toughest time in America to be a politician. Tell me what you think. This has been the Trevor Donald Experience.